Fighting in Fortnite has gotten so hard that it just makes way more sense to hide around a corner and lurk on someone than it does to actually just shoot them from a distance. And this is all one player's fault. A player so scary that he bullied Prime Tayson. There were lurks before him, but he was the first lurker. He was doing this all the way back in 2020, and his name was Mohammed SR4. If only he knew what he had released on the world only a few years later. Now, Mohammed SR4 was allergic to carrying a shotgun, but in his defense, he didn't really need one. He would hide inside vaults, besides piles of loot, behind walls. It honestly didn't really matter. He was an absolute menace. Every time he'd get an elimination onto a known player, he'd tweet the clip of him watching it back in replays whilst talking some crazy smack.
Fighting a pro player, guys. Pro player. Oh, Mr. Savage, you trying to get my wall? Oh, box like fish. Box like fish. What happened? What happened, Savage? What happened? What happened? What happened? What happened, bro? What happened? Box like fish. What happened, bro? What happened?
His mechanics were a little shaky, yeah, sure, but he did know how to lurk, and this got him into many finals lobbies. Mohammed earned a total of $3,450 on PC and $15,605 on console. Sure, he could actually play an endgame as well, but lurking got him eliminations on some of the best players of 2020 like Metro, and he literally invented the modern day lurk. But watch out next time you're still in a tournament, because 6 years later, he is still doing this, and he even placed 29th in the most recent Solo Cash Cup Opens on the Middle East. Now, outside of the anomaly that is Mohammed SR4, nobody really lurked in the first few chapters of Fortnite. But back around this time, the defensive box fighting skill of the average player was literally terrible. Players would box in a single box instead of 2 or 15. They would never put a cone inside their box, and most players had no clue how to make a safe edit to hit some counter damage back on you. But on top of that, defensive box fighting was even worse because of some of the items like traps and RPGs. So if you were good, you literally had no reason to lurk. However, have you noticed anything else about this gameplay that's on screen right now? It's not the mechanics or the fact that everyone sucks, it's the fact that there's no visualized sound effects. Currently, almost every single player who plays competitive Fortnite plays with the visualized sound effects on. If you don't use the setting, you are actively putting yourself at a disadvantage. This shows where all of the sounds are around you, and because Fortnite's audio is questionable at best, you're basically just giving yourself much more information by using this setting, so there's no reason not to use it. But what most people forget is that this sound originally turned your audio from stereo to mono, meaning you couldn't tell which direction the sound was coming from. Fortnite has a lot of different audio layers. There's gun sounds, pickaxe sounds, sounds of builds being placed and being destroyed, your teammate screaming max when he's hitting for 40, and of course footstep audio. It was and still is incredibly difficult to hear footsteps in Fortnite, so I think one of the reasons that players didn't lurk was just because you couldn't hear their footsteps anyway, and then if you shot someone, there was a 99% chance that they just sucked at defensive box fighting. So honestly, there just wasn't really much need for a lurking meta to evolve. It also didn't help when there were a lot of sound bugs like the riot control baton, which was a pickaxe which completely removed all of your footstep audio, and Metro actually abused this to win a solo cash cup. But this changed in Chapter 2 Season 8 when Fortnite changed visualized sound effects to be stereo instead of mono, so now everyone would know where you were. To add to this, people actually learned how to box fight, making it harder to kill people than ever, so people started to get creative. In Chapter 3 Season 2's FNCS Grand Finals, N-Pen and D-Roller pickaxed this floor and butter barn down to 50 HP and then hid underneath it. The Mancake NPC standing on top of it sold launch pads, and they were using this as bait to try and drop a player down. Unfortunately, the player who fell for it was Booga, and he and Miro actually ended up tied third. So this lurk actually cost them $20,000 minimum, but they also potentially could have won FNCS had they had a good game this match, and that would have actually denied Peterbot his first FNCS win. So you could say lurking won Peterbot his first FNCS. Now, metas develop based mainly on what the top players are doing first, and then everyone underneath them ends up catching up, usually much later. This is because the best players are always fighting against other best players who always have good strats, and they need to find ways to counter this. And one team found a very easy way to kill the best players in the world. Teeny and Misha placed third by lurking in all 12 games of the FNCS Grand Finals in Chapter 4 Season 3, and in the wise words of myself from 2023, Mohammed SR4 walked so Teeny could run. My video on this was titled The Worst Fortnite Strategy I've Ever Seen, and why it's genius, but seeing how the meta has developed since then, I can't possibly call this the worst strategy anymore because literally everyone was doing it and they were like 3 years ahead. Misha and Teeny had 10 different drop spots planned, and which one they chose was dependent on where the bus path was. They would fake glide in to make it seem like they were landing at a POI nearby, but at the last minute swerve to a location that had 3 or 4 chests. Teams near them never knew where they were, but this allowed them to sneak into another team's looting path completely undetected. They had studied where the other teams were looting, so they knew exactly when a player was going to rotate into them. They even went as far as dropping loot that they had accidentally picked up, so so that other players didn't get suspicious when the floor spawns weren't there. They even wore white skins when camping in the snowy biome. Misha and Tini studied how most of these teams around them planned to play and then set up 10 different counter strategies. Now, it didn't work every game, but in the ones that it did, they instantly got an elimination, which gave them points, loot, and access to the other team's looting path and position. In the games this was successful, they could also then just camp the reboot card of the other player, because back then you couldn't just buy the reboot card with gold. This was so successful because nothing like this has really been done before outside of Mohammed SR4, and when teams tried to counter it on day 2, they already had so many looting paths planned that it was just impossible to predict where they'd be. To this day, I still think this is one of the best planned Fortnite tournaments of all time, and it was all based around lurking. Now, the team strat was way ahead of its time, but as the years went on, doing stuff like this actually started to become necessary. The longer a game has been out, the better the average player is. Take me as an example. I'm better this year than I was last year, and I was better last year than I was the year before that, and that is true for most people as well. No longer are players building a single wood box with no code in it to defensively box fight. They're making 12 metal boxes and sitting in the middle. This means that it's much harder to eliminate someone just by shooting them and then box fighting them. And then when Fortnite's main game mode switched to trios in Chapter 6, this became even more necessary. Fights in trios are long. A 3v3 between two good teams is rarely finished quickly, so this often attracts third parties who want a piece of the action, and then these fights get even messier. But if you're able to quick dead one player from the team, you're immediately at a huge advantage. And I think this is why so many lurks started to happen in Chapter 6. In Season 2, Vino, Vico, and Flixie took a page out of Mohammed SR4's book and planned a strategy to camp on a vault. They waited for Queasy to run in and then just 3v1'd him, picking up a free elim and the vault loot. Prodoxy, Pablo, and Chino won FNCS and had some of the best placements in Chapter 6, and their entire strategy was either W-keying teams around them or lurking into surge bases to wipe out one player when they didn't even know that they were there. In a year where the entire Storm Surge meta was trading, they lurked and W-keyed their way to an FNCS win and some of the best placements. Now, I already analyzed this at the end of my Surge trading video, and listen to how I concluded this. So I do predict in the future that even more top-level pro teams are just going to be crouching and sneaking and making little rat plays to try and get some easy elims and damage. And not even 2 months later, the FNCS Global Championship was won by a lurk play. Vanya, Marius, and Pixie used this launchpad every single game, so when they were in second place and Queasy, Murstache, and Swizzy were in first, Queasy, Murstache, and Swizzy rotated all the way over to this launchpad, intentionally taking rotation paths where they wouldn't be seen from the teams near them, and then camped and waited for Vanya's team to use the pad. When they did, they managed to knock one out of the sky before jumping into a 3v3 fight that did end up taking some time, which they ended up winning. This essentially wiped Vanya's team out, which allowed Queasy's team to then win in the final match. Almost a year on from this, the meta has now developed to the point where everybody lurks, and there's even 4 different types of lurk.
Okay, if you actually want the definitions of lurk, and don't call me weird for this, I didn't come up with these. Penny lurk is just waiting on someone's loot path. Fred lurk is just crouching up on someone who's standing still, whether they're like surge basing or just whatever. Fax lurk is when you lurk and then get shit on. And then the Omzo lurk is when you lurk for ages and nothing happens and you just walk away anyway.
Players in Fortnite have gotten so good at defensively box fighting nowadays that it's just extremely difficult to get a quick elimination. So naturally, lurking has taken over competitive Fortnite.